Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 4th of May, 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we are delighted to have David Ellis with us on live video Skype link. Of course, David is Strategic Defence Initiatives. Well, what an interesting day, because the beginning of the morning, we were waiting for the announcement.
Yes. So a bit spectacular, Brian, in a sense, because what seems to have happened is that there was a directive went out at 3 o'clock in the morning to all the palace staff saying you've got to be in London for this massive announcement. Of course, the speculation went wild as to what it might be. Was somebody dying? Perhaps somebody was going to abdicate. Well, it turns out that it was that Prince Philip is going to retire from his public duties. We have titled this Good Riddance because I'm not entirely certain what he did other than cause offence to many people over the years.
Well, we could do a whole programme on Prince Philip, I think, and his connections through to some very interesting families in Germany, but we'll save that for another day. But your point is correct. So we have a 3 o'clock in the morning meeting, the middle of the night is the correct way to describe this, in order to announce this on polling day. Could it not have waited till tomorrow? I think this is some form of operation to see how the public reacted, and I think it's a stepping stone towards abdication. So we've got the nation in turmoil at the very stage that an election is called. Something is going on behind the scenes here.
So let's just look at some of the media coverage. This was The Independent this morning. The Sun mistakenly reports Prince Philip is dead. So the Sun this morning, the first thing they had out was a report saying that Prince Philip is dead. Well, The Independent thinks that's a mistake. That's not fake news. It's not someone not checking their sources properly. That is a mistake. How does that work?
Well, because there's two sets of rules. There's rules for people properly reporting what's happening, and there's special rules for the mainstream media. Of course, full fact, under the full fact rules, a mistake like this would certainly be fake news.
Right. Okay, well, let's look at what else was said. What would happen if the Queen abdicates? Speculation over monarch stepping down after Buckingham Palace calls emergency meeting. And that was in the Mirror. And then the Express saying, what will happen if the Queen abdicates? Will Prince Charles or will become king? And what was fascinating about these types of articles that were floating around was, of course, they didn't tell us what would happen. Because, of course, if it had been the abdication of the Queen at this point in time, well, we would have been in a very interesting situation, because we would have had Parliament dissolved, we would have had Theresa May operating under the royal prerogative, and then we would have had no monarch, which meant the royal prerogative didn't exist. So where would that have left us? Constitutional crisis at the very least.
Constitutional crisis, but reality would have come to the surface, which is we would be governed by a criminal elite who make the rules up as they go along, and that criminal elite would simply be in power. This would be a Conservative Party coup, is the right word, the right way to express it, and we would be at the very start of a real police state. Perhaps we could bring David in here. The implications of this are truly horrible. I think this is an operation to more than drift in. This is a bit of a gale coming in, get people used to the idea that the Queen is going to be stepping down, and presumably it will be Dark Lord Prince Charles who'll be taking the throne.
Well, you've got to, I mean, one thing's for clear, you've got to see this is a whole lot of spin going on here. You know, this is spin, spin, spin. Where's the reality? What's really going on? Whose interests would it be if this was the case or not the case? So, you know, let's just try and all be objective about this and just see what's going on. Because what I see is a repeat of all the nonsense that we've had over the last couple of months about nuclear this, nuclear that, and a lot of nuclear spinning prior to the snap general being announced. So pretext on that front. So then we've seen, you know, just chatter and traffic, you know, of huge amounts of way above normal amounts of this sort of subject. So the same thing's happening again. So what I think is at the bottom of this is a huge amount of spinning, and the reality is more than likely something completely different. So I think people have got to be very, very careful about really what's actually at the bottom of this and who is driving it. Someone's driving it because a lot of the media are involved. So it's certainly not, my worry here really is what, timing wise, we've got all this going on, and then someone's throwing this in the hat as well. What's next? What else do we
Well,
need? It's very dangerous indeed.
it's dangerous stuff, and of course, the minimum it is doing is confusing the public. A lady spoke to me the other day talking about the local elections coming up, and she said, "Brian, it's so difficult to know what to do." And we had a little discussion, but there was a straw poll taking place on the streets. That lady was already confused with what was going on in the country. Now, as you say, we've got more uncertainty, chaos, disruption coming in. The mainstream media, whether it's the BBC or the newspapers, are clearly complicit in what's going on. So somebody or some organisation is driving this. Later in the news, we'll be coming back to the subject of Theresa May's special advisor, Messina. And I think we're going to get more than a clue as to what's really going on. Dangerous, you've said it's dangerous. I totally agree with this. We are heading towards a Conservative Party dictatorship. And of course, we know they're criminal. We've got the election fraud, we've got issues with banks, we've got the child abuse. I think these people realise the public are coming for them. And what are they doing? They're putting up a smokescreen, hoping to get May re-elected with a bigger majority. And then we're in a police state. Very dangerous.
Well, of course, now that Prince Philip has retired, Brian, I presume he's coming off the civil list and will get the state pension.
What a wonderful thought that would be.
Well,
what a wonderful thought that would be. Perhaps we could get him into sheltered accommodation of the standard that other people in this country have to endure. And perhaps we could put him on the same monthly income. In fact, maybe we could get him under one of the state's care programs, because that ought to solve the problem fairly quickly.
Well, that's exactly right. Today, this man, Sir Andrew Dilnot, has suggested that pensioners shouldn't rule out continuing to pay national insurance contributions until the day they die in order to close the social care gap. Now, I wonder what kind of social care problems that Prince Philip is going to have.
Well, I think he's going to be given the highest form of care because the money, of course, is going to come straight out of the public purse.
Right.
We've got another Sir here, Sir Andrew Dilnot. Don't know what he's raking in, but I'm going to assume he's living on more than £200 a week. So another elitist who's saying what's going to happen for the rest.
Well, that's true. He was on Radio 4's Today programme this morning. He said it's perfectly plausible that people of working age would end up paying national insurance contribution after they retire. So they'll get their £140 a week or whatever it is in state pension, and they'll have to give 20 of it back in national insurance contributions.
In order to pay his attendance money in the House of Lords, presumably.
Well, of course, he was running the Commission on Funding of Care and Support. So he does. This was for the coalition government in 2010. So he does know what he's talking about. He understands what the situation is. And in fairness to him, he was attempting, or he was recommending that when somebody reaches the point of the age of requiring social care, that, of course, what we're talking about for international viewers is old age care, is that contributions from individuals towards their old age care should be capped at £35,000. That's what he was aiming to achieve. This, at the time, was welcomed by the Health Secretary, who at that time was Andrew Lansley. David Cameron and Ed Miliband at the time said that they would call for cross-party talks on the issue, and of course, quick as a flash, those didn't happen. So in fairness to Andrew Dilnot, he was actually attempting to limit what people were expected to contribute to their social care, the rest to be taken up by the state. At the moment, the state can take everything that you own in order to pay for your social care if they feel the need to do so.
Well, and that is exactly what is happening, because we're seeing more social services across the country moving in to take people's property in order to pay for the care. So this is being reported from right the way across the country at the moment. And in fact, we've got some very interesting interviews coming up with people who have experienced big problems both under the NHS and within the care system for elderly people.
So it's perhaps good that Prince Philip is retiring, but maybe he should experience some of these problems that other people have to face.
Would be good, but I think unlikely.
Yes. Okay, let's move on to this one. This is Ollie Pinnock, who, professional boxer by trade, decided that he should challenge the issue of council tax and questioning whether council tax is a lawful tax in this country. So he never refused to pay. He simply said that he would withhold payment until such times as certain questions were answered, on the basis that he wanted to avoid committing any kind of offence under the law. And he, as we reported a couple of days ago, he has now been arrested. He's now been in front of magistrates, and he's been remanded in custody. We're not clear what he's been remanded in custody for. But this, and as we reported a couple of days ago, although it's still a bit vague at the moment, there is a possibility he may have been heard in front of magistrates via a video link. So that hasn't yet been confirmed, but that's certainly what was being mentioned when we first heard about this. Now, the key point here is remand. When somebody is placed on remand, this is normally, Brian, for serious offences, murder, offences where somebody is likely to abscond, perhaps. I'm not quite clear why somebody who is at worst avoiding paying council tax, why that would be considered a remand offence.
Well, I think what we're starting to see happen, Mike, is that the state is beginning to realise that people are waking up to the sheer fraud of council tax. So they feel that the best way to fend off people asking the right question is fear. And what better way to induce fear than if you dare to challenge your council tax, then the police are going to hold you in cells and you're going to be treated differently from other people who are accused of crimes.
Now, many people have been contacting the detention suite that he's been held at, and I can't remember the police station. Do you remember the?
Well, we know it's Essex. Yeah.
And of course, not many people getting much of a response, because the usual is that they don't want to give any out any information about people that are held in any kind of custody. But what's also interesting is that people who have managed to get through to the custody suite have not been able to obtain any information about how long he'll be on remand, when there might be a court date, and so on. So this is quite staggering in many respects.
This is police state.
First of all,
this is police state.
Absolutely. So first of all, we have somebody who is campaigning on a particular issue. He's doing it peacefully. He's doing it quietly. He's doing it, we would argue, lawfully. The other side perhaps is arguing that that's not the case, but nonetheless, he's not breaking windows. He's not kicking anybody's head in. He's not murdering anybody, and yet he finds himself on remand for an indeterminate time. This is quite dangerous. This is dangerous,
and I had hoped to have a slide. I haven't got it with me to bring it up on screen, but let me just read you a little bit of this. This is a headline from where are we? The Express, and it says, "Sturgeon's shame: SNP leader accused of hypocrisy for not paying council tax." And it says that basically she owes a bill of, let me put my glasses on here, £2,950 a year on her grace and favour Georgian mansion in Edinburgh. So although we're north of the border, so obviously that falls under Scottish law, essentially we're seeing the same thing. There's a different law for the elites, whether we're talking about England and Wales or it's Scotland. What a contrast. You're the SNP leader, so, well, I don't think I'll bother to pay my council tax. Nothing happens. Here's a boxer, and he's held on remand.
If anybody wants to keep tabs on this case, the Facebook group is Practical Lawful Dissent, if you want to have a search for that and keep up with what's going on.
Okay, well, let's move on to the subject of well, it's electioneering and its defence. This is the most offensive article I have ever seen. Well, I'll say from my local paper, the Herald, because it turns out that Theresa May popped up in Plymouth yesterday. Now, remember, what's been said in national media is that whether she's been in Cornwall or Bristol, the public kept away from Theresa May, not allowed to speak to her, not allowed to heckle. Reporters kept away from the main melee of all the Conservative hype around her. She turns up in Plymouth. Now, Plymouth is a key military town, a big dockyard, and the picture on the left is the one that caught my attention, because this is Johnny Mercer, Conservative MP, has taken Theresa May to meet some Royal Marines at home, and I just thought, this is unbelievable cynicism. I tweeted this out a few days ago. I said, at Conservatives cynically timed the release of Al Blackman, Royal Marine, for election political advantage. In the background, Theresa May still cutting the Royal Marines and the British military. So they let him out. They knew this election was coming up, Mike. They let Al Blackman out. They had to let Al Blackman out, because if they didn't let him out, there is no way that Theresa May and what is he? A soap advert MP, Johnny Mercer, I can't remember what the soap was. This is unbelievable, cynical hypocrisy by Theresa May and the Conservatives. Gary Streeter, Oliver Colville, Johnny Mercer should be utterly ashamed of themselves. This is electioneering. We haven't seen this scale of stuff before. And if I sound motivated, I am. Obviously, Al Blackman spent 3.5 years as a political prisoner of the Conservatives. David, I better hand over to you. This is just outrageous.
Completely. It's so cynical, isn't it, on so many different levels, that they go and, that they have a totally stage managed event there, with going to see some of them bootnecks, considering what that corps is going through and what it's been through, with the dearest of its blood, and this nonsense of the guys being taken political prisoner. Now, they caved in with the Al Blackman thing, clearly because the pressure was so great. Now, the key thing here is, of course, is going to Plymouth and to that region, is that this is awfully interesting stuff from Mrs. May and her group and her regime, is that the decision was made, or a decision was made quite some time ago, that the entirety of all the Royal Navy would be withdrawn from Devon and Cornwall. So are we now seeing that decision is going to be rescinded, or is there going to be some other kind of plan or policy? But under the current setup here, what we're seeing is, of course, is that we're seeing just more cuts, and the cuts are getting worse, and they're including things like pensions within the budget, which is cheating. It's been openly stated by numerous admirals saying that that's wrong. So, what the reality here is, of course, is that they daren't really talk about what's actually going on in defence, because it would cost Theresa May the general election. Because what's happening is that we're continuing along the EU military unification pathway, but they just daren't talk about it. They can't talk about it because the public whiplash would be immense, utterly immense, to know that Brexit wasn't Brexit for the armed services. Brexit's only for some sort of charade that she's cooked up for the rest of us, but actually the heart of our nation is being left in the EU. So what kind of a deal is that?
David, let's pick up on that point that the Conservative MPs daren't talk about this subject. We'll just bring this slide on. This is from a few weeks ago when I asked my local MP, Gary Streeter, about front page articles in the Times and the Telegraph pointing out the perilous state of the British Armed Forces. And what was his response? It was to attack me personally. And of course you say, well, what's the matter with this man? Well, what the problem was, I think we're now seeing Gary Streeter, Johnny Mercer, Oliver Colville simply could not talk about this issue because they knew full well that the Conservative policy was massive defence cuts. And of course you've raised the issue of what the impact is of those cuts on procurement and pressure on defence industry in UK.
Well, let's move on to Rolls-Royce then, and well, KPMG actually, because Rolls-Royce did a deal, as we know, several months ago now, Following serious fraud office investigation into bribery charges, they agreed to pay £671 million in penalties. And of course, this was to do with paying, well, giving a luxury car and also £1 million worth of cash donations, shall we call them, to middlemen to ensure orders in Indonesia, Russia, China, Thailand, India, and Nigeria. And of course, that came under what was called a deferred prosecution agreement, where basically they agreed to pay this fine and any prosecution was dropped. And of course, if they'd been convicted under that prosecution, they may have been excluded from international competition for public contracts and so on. So what's happening is that the Financial Reporting Council, which, as they describe themselves, the UK's independent regulator responsible for promoting high-quality corporate governance and reporting to foster investment, and they've begun an investigation into KPMG Audit PLC, and that's in relation to the audit and financial statements of Rolls-Royce Group PLC for the year ending 31st of December 2010, and also for Rolls-Royce Holdings PLC for the years ending 31st of December 2011 to 2013. And what they intend to do is they're going to have an initial case examination. They're going to investigate. There's going to be a decision by their executive council about whether to issue a decision notice. And then there may be a referral to their enforcement committee and then to a tribunal. So this is not going to be a short-term process, but it's interesting that it's taking place nonetheless. KPMG said it's important that regulators acting in the public interest to review high-profile issues. We will cooperate fully with their investigation and so on. So any thoughts?
Well, I think that this is ideal material to speed up the collapse of the key defence industry companies in UK, because we've got Rolls-Royce and we've got British Aerospace. We've got Trump, who said that he's going to be pouring billions more dollars into the American defence industry. And I think, David, we need to come back to you here, because you predicted that what we're going to see is the Americans wiping out what remains of the British defence industry. The Europeans will take the rest, and then we're left with Britain simply hollowed out. We can't produce cars, boats, or ships. We can't hardly produce steel. We haven't got a defence industry.
Well, we haven't got much at all, have we? Let's be frank. You know, we're left with a mere shadow of what we used to have 50, 60 years ago. So, you know, this policy that's been adopted by these rather naive party representatives all these years. I'm not going to call them MPs, party representatives. You know, just not seeing the wood for the trees. But what's going to happen clearly here at the moment we get through this, you know, this damn general election, is that Trump is going to generate a huge amount of money, or is going to request a huge amount of money is generated from the Fed, and increase his defence spending substantially. So as we're seeing calls for increased defence spending in the EU zone, we're also seeing that in the US. So what will happen is that some of that money is going to stick somewhere, and I've said this many times, it'll stick somewhere. I mean, it could be Lockheed for the sake of argument with you, but it could be Northrop Grumman, whatever, you know, something of that nature, and it's going to stick in there. And what's going to happen is that BAE and also Rolls-Royce, because the two sort of go hand in glove, are going to get bought up, and they're going to get bought up with the money that Trump has just initiated. He's just, you know, manufactured the money via the Fed. So there's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars are going to be generated. So it's simply not fair to say the Americans are going to take BAE or Rolls-Royce. You know, there's a faction that are going to take control of it. It might not necessarily be Americans, but there's certainly a moneyed. There's a money is not really. It doesn't recognise countries and religion and so forth. It just is what it is. But this is the likelihood of what's going to happen with all that money, because BAE and Rolls are currently really cheap because they don't have a lot on their order books, because of this unification process that we've been going through for decades in the UK without anybody talking about it. And it's known as defence cuts, but it's not. It's a unification process of the military where they wanted to blend the policy, blend the budgets, and blend everything so that there would be single point purchase control from Brussels for capital budgets, procurement budgets. So they want procurement control. So they want control of the industries as well. So it all goes hand in glove. It's one. It's going to be one big thing. It's going to be a big conglomerate. It's not. I'm finding myself sort of laughing, but it isn't a laughing matter because what it means for this country is really we're just sort of teetering on the cusp at this point in this general election of whether we continue to be a country or not.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's right. And just to reinforce that, then Jens Stoltenberg was speaking yesterday, and he was commenting on EU defence cooperation defence cooperation between the EU and NATO. He says that this is now the norm, not the exception. He was talking to the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee and Subcommittee on Security and Defence, and he said a strong European defence contributed to fair burden sharing. And again, David will just reiterate once again that, of course, many European countries also members of NATO. So this isn't about Jens Stoltenberg having discussions with individual NATO member states. This is Jens Stoltenberg having discussions with the European Parliament and NATO recognizing the European Union as being a separate military entity from any of the NATO member states. And that is an important thing. He was also talking about the agenda of the upcoming May summit in Brussels. This is happening in about 3 weeks, 25th of May, and it's going to be attended by Turkish President Erdogan. Also, Trump is expected to be there, and he said that they're going to be dealing with terrorists, apparently. The importance of transatlantic relations as well as burden sharing would be the main topics on the agenda, and he said that the summit would be hosting Donald Trump for the first time. And again, we've mentioned this many times now since the 2015 conference of the European Defence Agency. He said that civilian and military measures should be taken together in the fight against terrorism. So again, we see this pressure from NATO to push for the merger of civilian and military structures. And where does that take us?
Police state.
It's very simple.
It's very
so. David, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, as I've said, NATO's arrangement is a group of sovereign countries that are in a collective. Now, EU military unification and EU military union is a very different arrangement. It's nothing like that. It's taking all that, unifying it, and putting it into one single point control from Brussels in an absolute fashion and an all-in fashion. Nuclear weapons, the lot, all the Maston, our Land Rovers, anybody that's left in our services, all gets unified into that one force. So the whole arrangement here with Stoltenberg saying about more and more cooperation, it's a slow drift. It's a slow, steady drift, consistent message coming out that this is all okay, this is fine, it's not a problem, nobody needs to worry. It's awfully nice, isn't it? It's lovely. We're all getting on so well and they're kissing each other and all the rest of it. This is so nobody gets spooked that actually what's happening is that the military, our country's military, is going to go into another state. It's as simple as that. And NATO could technically be, I could argue that it was a bus in order to bus it all in and drop it off in Brussels. So that's the situation. And it's something that drastically needs to be debated. It needs to be aired. It needs to be scrutinised. It needs to be evaluated. But we come back to this problem that, of course, the Conservatives can't discuss this. They won't discuss it. They'll do anything to kind of quash it, control it, stop it from coming out. So we've got, the main bulk of our country, that doesn't vote. There's only a minority in the country that votes. The majority don't vote. And perhaps if they were aware of something like this, that they would go out and vote and do something about it. But under the current system and the election campaign that we've got, which has been triggered by, obviously there's a lot of topography going on. We've got this principal issue. We've got the scandal with the banking and the money laundering that the Tories are accused of. And we've also got the election fraud that the Tories are accused of. And clearly what's happened here is that the party control, let's differentiate that between Mrs. May, she's just an actress. The party control at CCHQ saw a lead in the polls that was sufficient enough to think that they could carry a general election on the lead that they'd got. Now, they only want their vote to get out, nothing more. They don't want the rest of the population to be aware of all this. And they certainly don't want the rest of the population to go out and vote. So they're only looking at targeting their existing voters. So their system for doing that is incredibly efficient. It is very, very efficient. And they know damn well that under the current polls, if they get their vote out, they will win. And they're not interested really in anything that deviates from that narrative or that debate. So the main body of the Conservatives that think that they're doing the right thing and voting for this need to really, really sit back and have a look, and all the rest of it. The Brexit isn't Brexit. Our military's being left in. Another 5 years of Conservative regime, there won't be an NHS. The police will probably be privatised, or well and truly on the way of being privatised by that stage. And this country will be a very, very different country. And I've had a great deal of debate with local Labour voters saying that they didn't have a lot of confidence in Corbyn, and because they wanted Brexit, we're predominantly in a Brexit region here, that they would vote for May. But once we'd sort of discussed it all and we got through the stall thing, they then realised that, of course, that May isn't Brexiting. It's a complete charade. So what's got to happen here tactically is that the main body of our society has to vote somewhere else. It cannot. The UKIP vote has got to remain solid. They've got to get out and get working, otherwise nothing will happen. The Labour vote has got to really, really go for it. Otherwise, we're going to have more of the same. And, it's not in this country's interest to allow these people to carry on in the vein that they're carrying on in.
Well, David, we have been talking about this issue for months and months now, and I'm going to again put this up because this section on the UK column website on EU military EU military unification gives people a lot of information which they can take to the hustings, they can take out onto the streets and distribute if they wish, and that's what it's there for. It's not for entertainment for people to read. Please print it out and distribute it far and wide, and perhaps we can have some impact on this general election if people just distributed the timeline that we have on there, for example.
Absolutely. Just get out there, get amongst them. Don't be hung up on whether someone's a Tory, a Labour, a Liberal, or a UKIP or whatever. Just get out and talk to as many people as you can, because if we can just work through this problem, let's just work the problem, not get hung up on party politics. We've just got to stop what's currently happening under May's regime. It's as simple as that. It has to be stopped, because if there isn't a halt, we won't have the scrutiny. There won't be a chance for a Labour MP to scrutinise this. It'll be done. There won't be a chance for a Liberal MP to scrutinise it, or a UKIP member or anybody else, or even, and this is the key thing, even a Tory MP that might be minded too. That's the thing. I mean, I vox pop these people, and they don't want it, but they don't know about it. They haven't been told. It's like, this is like the Pandora's box. And if the Pandora's box is opened, it's going to blow up and poison Theresa May's cabinet, well and truly.
And that's what we've got to do, of course, is get the truth out amongst these people. Eye on the clock here, I think.
Yes. Okay. So let's move on. Syria, the Astana talks have been taking place over the last day or so, and they TASS here reporting that Russia, Iran, Turkey have reached consensus on these so-called de-escalation zones, safe zones, and of course this is the first time that the US had sent any representation in this case. This meeting is now concluded, and they've decided that the de-escalation zones are the right way to go. They said the countries acting as guarantors for the Syrian ceasefire have reached a consensus on some memorandum provisions. The work on the document is nearing completion, and they said that the next summit will take place in a month's time in early June. In the meantime, of course, much to the disgust of many in the Western media and so on, Putin and Trump seem to be continuing to talk on a fairly, certainly much more regularly than some would like. So they've now had their third contact, their third telephone call a couple of days ago. And of course, that's what resulted in the US representation at the Astana talks. So that continues to go on. In the meantime, Trump, his threats to break up banks in the US under some 21st century Glass-Steagall legislation. The headline here saying Trump's threats to break up banks aren't scaring Wall Street yet. I would disagree with that. If you look at some of the rhetoric that's been in the financial press, both in the US and in the UK. And so this is a slight misrepresentation of what's going on. But this story on Trump amused me somewhat. This is Newsweek. Right-wing media critics slam BuzzFeed over Trump assassination joke. How do you make a joke about somebody being assassinated?
Well, I don't know. That's not our sort of policy to do that.
No.
And I think it shows something, doesn't it, about whoever's produced that report?
Well, there was two things about this Newsweek headline. It was that almost telling people that it should be a joke to talk about Trump's assassination, but also it fascinated me that on this article and also on the other article on this subject of Trump's assassination on the Newsweek website, they have a headline and then they have a video clip underneath it, which is completely separate from the main body of the article. So I'm not clear what they're trying to do here, Brian. They seem to be trying to take people's minds in two different directions at the same time.
Well, Mike, David Ellis has just mentioned this or a little bit earlier because he was talking about the control around the Tory party. In a few minutes, we're going to have a look behind the scenes again at Theresa May's outfit. And these, I'll call them the boys that Theresa's brought in from America. What is their speciality? Media manipulation, working of social media in order to skew elections, in order to win elections for people who should never win power because they're too dangerous. But a couple of minutes and we'll take the top of it.
Yeah, but I mean, Theresa seems to be a little bit confused here because Brussels is meddling in our election, she says. I wasn't sure whether she meant Russia because Brussels and Russia, they do share some letters, and at least 4 letters that are similar, so maybe she just got confused. But here's France 24's coverage of it. British PM says Brexit threats time to affect elections. So we're going to call this It's Not the Russians for once. So she said that in the last few days we've seen just how tough the Brexit talks are likely to be as she continues to pretend that they are taking place. The European Commission's negotiating stance has hardened, she said. Threats against Britain have been issued by European politicians and officials. All of these acts have been deliberately timed to affect the result of the general election that will take place on June the 8th, she said. So I just thought we would compare that with what Hillary Clinton said yesterday, because she, of course, was talking about her failure to be elected as president. And she said, I was on the way to winning until a combination of FBI heads Jim Comey's letter and the Russian WikiLeaks raised doubts in the minds of people who were inclined to vote for me and got scared off. So she is complaining that during the election, people were posting stuff into the media which affected the result. Theresa May seems to have got onto the same bandwagon over Brexit. Is she already setting us up for failing?
Or does she know that there's going to be a comeback? What does she know? Perhaps she's going to come back in the running. Well, we better bring this one up just to end this segment of the news. That, of course, back in February, we had Chris Bryant, Labour MP, saying that there was clear evidence of Russian corrupt involvement in elections in France and Germany. He also says it's highly likely they're interfering in UK. And we said, provide the evidence, and we bet him a new pair of white Y-fronts that he wouldn't produce any. Well, here we are in May. We still have the Y-fronts. We still have no evidence whatsoever from Chris Bryant. So we've got more media spin.
We should probably just say that if anybody that's just sort of new to the UK column doesn't quite understand the Y-front issue, they should probably type in Chris Bryant and Y-fronts into their suitable search engine, and they'll find out.
You should find a picture of him advertising himself for liaisons dressed solely in an immaculate pair of Y-fronts. Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the really deep stuff. And we're going to come back into this man that we featured yesterday, Jem Messina. He's been brought across. He was previously part of Obama's staff, and he's now working with a big team around Theresa May. And of course, what is their job? To skew the British public to be stupid enough to vote for Theresa May. And this man is connected with US Common Purpose. Now, I'm going to go through this quite quickly because I want to bring David in to comment about this. This is the report from Huffington Post. Encourage you to go and have a look at it because it says that Messina spent a lot of time in the Washington Common Purpose meeting. So the man is a political guru. His job is to skew voters' belief systems in order to get his people in power. And he's working with American Common Purpose. Now, the key thing is American Common Purpose the same as the British Common Purpose? We think it is, because if you look back, the Common Purpose agenda comes out of America, and it was Julia Middleton from Common Purpose, UK Common Purpose, who said so. She had been in America. She came across the sort of Common Purpose idea, thought it was good, got £500,000 from various banks that she doesn't want to tell you who those are, and she set up Common Purpose here. Now, this is a quote from Julia. She said at the end of September 2008 in the US, "I don't think I met anyone who did not use the word authentic. Authentic was coupled with loads of words, authentic leaders, authentic brands." Now, she just gets very big on authentic here. What I'm interested in is that in September 2008, Julia Middleton was clearly walking the corridors of power in the States. And let's remember what this organization says it's about. It's about taking control of people in the space between the public and the government, getting into that space, getting Common Purpose trained people into that space, where of course they can drive agendas. But she says we have no other agenda. There is no underlying social, political or economic master plan, and we guard our independence keenly. Now, you were showing yesterday, Mike, that Common Purpose was using the ambassador's residence, where was it? Can you remind me?
Qatar.
In Qatar, in order to start spreading the Common Purpose agenda there. So the rhetoric from Julia Middleton and the reality of what they're doing on the ground is very plain. Let's bring in this one. So this is back in 2007, and she said, "I know that in Downing Street, they're always wondering whether people have sufficient guile to be brought into a coalition the government is building." Now, this is the Conservative Lib Dem coalition, so she knew it was going to happen, and they wanted people with guile. That word to me means collaborators, people being devious. So let's have a look at how this looks around the Washington project. Common Purpose Washington, it used to meet at the Capitol Hilton in Washington, D.C. Here's the founder, an Obama aide called Eric Smith, political director Mitty Saith. And who were they linked with? The Center for American Progress, left-leaning organizations, Media Matters, Change to Win, Campaign to Rebuild, Renew America Now, MoveOn.org, Unity 09. This was all supported by the Blue Engine message and media company. And in fact, Eric Smith was involved in that company, and another media company called Progressive Media. Well, let's bring in this article. I'll expand this shortly, but this is showing Gordon Brown and Obama using almost identical speech language, including Common Purpose. And then, hey presto, we have Jim Messina, who has been Common Purpose at the heart of the Obama administration, now working directly alongside Theresa May's election outfit.
But Obama left-leaning, Theresa May supposedly conservative. How does that work?
I don't believe Theresa May is conservative at all. What she is more of Cameron's communitarian political agenda, and this, of course, is where big society comes from. So we just finished the segment. We've got here the Gerard Group. This is where a lot of these people have come from. This is Republican Senator. You'll have to look that one up yourselves, but bring that picture back on. And this is the article here from the Telegraph. And the Telegraph had said, well, this is remarkable. Obama's speech and Gordon Brown's speech, virtually identical in the key aspects, and both mentioning Common Purpose. In comes this Common Purpose man for Theresa May. This is the man controlling Theresa May. This is why she can't speak to the public, because she may stray off message. And we, of course, have warned and warned about the common purpose agenda at the heart of the Labour and Conservative government. What are they capable of? Well, this is the documentation that showed basically the Cabinet Office was prepared to change the minutes of meetings in order to hide the fact that common purpose was being offered big contracts. So this is the power of common purpose, not only at the heart of the Labour government, but David, we're now seeing it not alongside Theresa May. This is controlling her.
It is completely controlling her. It's almost like she's a puppet, a facade, and it's nothing like what we. I mean, the analogies that they try and make about her is that it's Maggie Thatcher. It's nothing like that at all. Maggie Thatcher was recruited by Airey Neave and Ian Gow in order to combat the Heath problem, and I think all those people would be turning in their graves at this. They really would. What we've really got here, guys, is huge data mining and data harvesting going on, and there'll be if these guys are are as good as we think they are on what they did in America, what they will be doing, there'll be real-time files on every single human being in Britain during this election, and they will have very, very large computing power calculating via the algorithms that they've got in order to make sure that they get their vote. And this will be, this is what we're seeing across the board with the harvesting of data on Twitter, social media, and so on and so forth, is that will all be churned through they'll have, they'll know exactly where their vote is on every single, this has happened during the election in America.
Sorry, David, and the important thing here as well, aside from how people might vote in terms of Conservative or Labour, but of course they're also looking for people who aren't going to vote. And the question then is, what happens to those ballot papers?
Well, as I've said, they don't want the majority to vote. They only want the small percentage that do. They don't want the rest of the country waking up. No. We don't want that. So this is all geared. They just want the minimum amount of fuss. We don't want the insensitive stuff being talked about. We just want to keep it very, very calm, very, very quiet. We just want our minimum Tory vote to go out and vote, and they will tune the campaign daily, hourly, by each second, by all the data that's being churned through on what everybody is doing constantly, that they'll know the following day what they've got to do or not do. This was done during the American campaign. They had 256 real-time live files on every single person in America to know what to do. So this is an import of the same, the Conservatives here have imported these people, or whether they're just under the same control anyway to begin with, probably highly likely, is that this is where we are. So this isn't real. This is something else. This is an NGO, a non-elected NGO group that is circumventing parliamentary scrutiny and parliamentary process on all levels, David, in order to win the election.
David, that is absolutely the point, that we've now got a complete breakdown of government in Britain. We have a cabal running it via profit, buying in companies to do this. And we also know that they're heavily targeting military veterans. We've seen the cynical ploy over Al Blackman, but it's also becoming apparent that agencies are targeting veterans. Clearly, they're very, very frightened as to what retired military people would do if they knew what was really going on. Just as we end the news, just give us a general comment on that, if you will.
Well, there's very important reason for that. Anybody that's been through any kind of training, I mean, you could be an engineer, but particularly anybody military-wise, what will tend to happen is that they're very good at working out problems. And if you present them with something, they'll sit and think through, what's happening, what's going on. They'll try and analyze it, and they'll work through a problem. And even when you challenge their reality, and their reality becomes completely busted and the actual problem becomes apparent, what tends to happen with military, particularly vets, is that they don't stall. They will carry on. Now, in most instances, somebody that hasn't gone through that won't have the mental capability to carry on the fight. And that's why the veterans are key to all this, because if they knew en masse what was going on in the country and under the government with the military, there would be a huge backlash. Huge. It is the Conservatives' Pandora's box. All you literally have to do is to get in these people's faces, mention the magic words that we're talking about EU military union, EU military unification process, open the Pandora's box in front of these Tory MPs and just watch it happen. They just won't be able to sustain this at the general election if it's aired properly. Amongst that and the NHS, there's enough ammo here for everyone to sort of come on board, and have a damn good go at this.
Okay, David, thank you very much. Excellent summary. What amazing events are starting to unfold in UK. And I'll just end on the note that we know a small number of people say, well, we find the UK column very difficult to watch because the news is so depressing. Well, our response to that is we are reporting the real news. And yes, some of it is depressing, but people have to understand what's going on, because if they don't understand what's going on, they can't fight what's going on. And of course, if you're worried about it being a bit dark and a bit depressing, then the rule is that action conquers fear. So don't just watch the programme, go away armed with the information to take action. And David Ellis has given you a big pointer there. There are key subjects. It may be the military, if that's your scene, or the NHS. Get these subjects in front of the candidates and challenge them.
7:30 tonight, Ian Crane is in the studio with the Crane Report. He will be speaking to Max Egan, and at 9 p.m. On the live stream, Ian Crane will have Fracking Nightmare, and we'll repeat this news programme in between.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us, David. Thank you to our audience. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.